Uh, This is a special program with different partners. And so we are very excited. We have 6 different sponsors for this program and some really good, 3 good speakers. So welcome all. I was hoping I see somebody we were waiting for, but I'm just going to go ahead. So I'm with United Nations of Greater Philadelphia. I'm president in waiting, and hopefully by next week, I will be voted in. So I would like to welcome you all. Our United Nations of Greater Philadelphia chapter does a lot of work on climate action. Water is also one of the big goals, and we work with different partners, Global Water Alliance and CFPA. We work with Coalition for Peace Action. We work with a lot too, all through the year. We work on peace programs. Some of the other things we focus on are human rights, usually have a good discussion or some kind of project related to it, and also sustainable development goals. We used to have a big group of students from universities that did work together, but lately we are seeing working more with one-on-one with individual interns that come in. Sorry, Okezue is calling. I think he's one of the speakers is trying to get in and he must be having difficulty. Sorry about this. So I would like to also mention to you some of this event, especially we are working on today, the focus is on water. And I will share with you some of the resources that we use for a lot of our project work. And I'd like to mention a couple of organizations, one local, Global Water Alliance, that does water programming and conferences all through the year. And I will share their link later on in the chat. They do have a lot of publications and research materials that everybody who's more interested can look into. Also, we get a lot of students who work with us, and especially water is a subject that is of a big interest. And in that, we work with UNA USA UNA USA has a department that does different water issues, and H2O for Life is one of the organizations that we work with, which is affiliated with UNA USA, and they have done various programs in the past with them. And H2O for Life has a lot of material, especially for youth and students, that they can use. If anyone is interested, you can look up even United Nations of Greater Philadelphia, which is unagp.org, and just send us in the info. You can contact us. I will also share my email if anybody is interested to volunteer with us, work with us on anything else. And also if anyone is interested, some youth are interested in any projects, we also support it. So I'm going to ask Ed Aguilar here and moving on to Ed Aguilar, because I am actually trying to get somebody's trying to get hold of me, one of our speakers. I think he's having trouble getting in. So let me help him out, Ed.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Manisha Patel. I'm Ed Aguilar. I'm the Pennsylvania director of the Coalition for Peace Action, and I also am on the board of the UN Association for Greater Philadelphia. I want to welcome all of you, and I want to thank all our co-sponsor organizations. Manisha mentioned the Global Water Alliance. We've got AGWA, which is the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. We have Sea Change, C is for Climate, and Molly Jones is our speaker from Sea Change. I believe because our keynote speaker, Ingrid Timbo, is running late or maybe having difficulty getting in from the West Coast, we're going to ask that Molly Jones will step in and be our first speaker for some 15 minutes. So Molly, if you will please go ahead and tell us a little bit about Sea Change. You've also worked for Sustainable Princeton, I know, and so we're glad to have you. Please take it away, Molly Jones.
Sounds great. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen for a moment. It's gonna be a little bumpy here for a second. Well, hold on one second. It is, oh, there we go. Okay, does that, Bob, can you give me a thumbs up? Does that look good?
That's good.
Okay, great, terrific. Okay, thank you so much for having me. I am here today representing Sea Change Conversations. So Sea Change is an organization that really focuses on bridging the gap about communicating around the topic of climate change. So really how it's become such a politicized issue. Our real goal is to take an apolitical approach so that skeptics or anyone who maybe isn't already a believer on this topic will hopefully hear the words we're saying, hear the science. So this evening, I am going to give you a little taste of kind of the Sea Change secret sauce, and we'll share some of our content, but I would throw out the invitation that if anyone has a large group that you think would benefit from hearing more about climate change, really the science behind climate change, please reach out to me. We are definitely open to in-person or online presentations. I am focusing today, since our topic is water, I'll focus on water. Okay, so with that, I just wanted to kick things off by saying, so on June 27th, in an unprecedented heat wave, the temperature in Portland, Oregon was 113 degrees. That's 41 degrees hotter than an average June day. The asphalt temperature in Portland, the asphalt temperature in Portland hit 164 degrees, hot enough to fry an egg and hot enough to scorch your skin if you fell on it unprotected. Hundreds died across the Northwest, with 96 deaths in Oregon. In 2010, Nashville was inundated by torrential rains, causing the Cumberland River to overflow. 26 people died. 10,000 were dislocated, and the economy was in tatters. It was considered a 1 in 1,000 year storm, something that wouldn't happen again for many lifetimes until it did 11 years later. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit this region, where many of us are living, causing thousands of dollars worth of damage and taking numerous lives. What do all of these occurrences have in common? They are all examples of how nature is playing by a new set of rules. She is coloring outside the lines that we thought circumscribed her. And why is this happening? Scientists have linked all of these changes to human-influenced climate change. So what is climate change? The changing of our long-term weather patterns, mostly heat, cold, precipitation, and wind. at local and global levels since the mid-20th century. Why is it happening? Because we are changing the composition of our atmosphere by adding greenhouse gases from burning fossil fuels in our land use practices. And greenhouse gases play an important role in our climate. Let's review the science. Many of you probably had this back in middle school, but I'll bring you back to a little refresher. When the sun's energy comes through the atmosphere and hits the planet's surface, some solar energy is absorbed, but much of it ricochets back off towards space at a different wavelength. Some of it is partially captured and re-radiated back to Earth by the greenhouse gases that trap it. These make up about 1% of our atmosphere. The typical greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and water vapor. Without those gases, we would have a frozen planet, so they definitely play a critical role. But by burning fossil fuels, we create more of them. We are simply capturing more energy and re-radiating more back to Earth, warming it and adding more energy to our climate systems. Another way to look at this is in the terms of the carbon dioxide cycle, how nature stores carbon dioxide between the Earth, oceans, and atmosphere. As we burn fossil fuels, we're taking carbon that nature has sequestered deep underground in the form of bits of plant and animal matter over hundreds of millions of years and pumping it back into the atmosphere at an alarmingly fast rate of over 40 billion tons of carbon every single year. This is much faster of a rate than when nature would be adding it. So we're upsetting that old balance. So here kind of starts to give you a snapshot of the impact that we're having. We're putting a lot more greenhouse gases up into our atmosphere. This chart shows how little carbon levels naturally fluctuated and how dramatic the change has been since the industrial period over the last 100 years. It is both the quantity, almost 60 billion tons each year, and the alarmingly fast rate, 100 times faster than it normally happens in nature, that is so concerning to scientists. As we learned in our earlier slide, when greenhouse gases increase, temperature also goes up. Due to the increase in greenhouse gas, the Earth's temperature has risen about 1.2 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit already. What this means is that all of our seasons are getting warmer, but the one that is especially concerning is summer. Our summers are expanding in length and getting hotter. As this graph shows, we are getting pushed towards extremely hot temperatures. In fact, major cities in the US now have an average of 6 heat waves per season when we only averaged 2 in the 1960s. And now they tend to be 3 to 5 degrees hotter. As you can see from this graph, in our region, we are experiencing 9 days of heat, more extreme heat, above 90 degrees than we did in 1979. So that's a little snapshot about heat, but today we're here to talk about water. So let's talk about water. What happens with our changing climate and water? So for one, many of our rainfalls are now much heavier than they were before. The reason for this is physics. As the warmer oceans evaporate more water into the air, warmer air holds more water vapor. Oh, excuse me. 1 degree Celsius warmer water of our atmospheric temperature holds 7% more water vapor. That's a dramatic increase if you take a moment to think about it. So we are expecting, and it is because of this that we're experiencing more deadly storm deluges. It's not necessarily that we're having more precipitation overall, but rather it's how it's falling. More in torrential and damaging downpours, less in restorative gentle rains. And intriguingly, as this graphic shows, it's happening everywhere, even in places that are getting drier. So when they finally do get needed rain, it's more often falls in a way that causes severe flooding instead of a soft, gentle rain. Right here in Princeton, this is Route 1 in Lawrenceville. All roads to and from Princeton were flooded or closed during Oh, am I unmuted? Looks like, okay, sounds good. Okay, I'm getting a few prompts here, so please someone chime in and let me know if I need to change what I'm doing. Well, let's see. Hold on one second, okay. So why is this occurring? It's because the increase in heat from climate change is playing havoc with our water systems. Hotter temperatures lead to more evaporation and less water captured in our aquifers. So in the future, we may not have enough water, and what we do have may also be compromised because it will have higher concentrations of toxins and other contaminants. But it's not just our groundwater, it's also our surface water. Our lakes and rivers and reservoirs, they're all negatively being impacted by climate change. Why? It's because more of that rainwater is evaporating and because our snowpack is diminishing. Precipitation in many mountainous regions is falling more as rain versus snow. And our snowpacks are getting smaller and melting earlier in the season due to warming temperatures. This endangers farmers, cities, and wildlife downstream that depend on the snowmelt for water in hot summer months. Conversely, in other areas, due to heavy storms and increased river flooding, we may have too much water, which leads to sewage overflows in neighborhoods. Water treatment plants are often overwhelmed and water can be compromised. Perhaps the most dramatic natural disasters are hurricanes, and they're getting slower, bigger, and badder, or more deadly, because they are deriving more power from our hotter oceans. In fact, we're now seeing storms that could be categorized as category 6 or 7 if our hurricane wind scales went up that far. So now I threw at you a lot of the gloom and doom of what we are experiencing, but I wanted to talk for a moment. I know I don't have too much time here this evening about what I can do. So I'm now taking off my hat. So prior to my time with Sea Change Conversations, I worked for an organization called Sustainable Princeton. And our mission at Sustainable Princeton was to bring about community change focused on the changing climate. So really we were talking or asking ourselves the question of, given these major global challenges of climate change, what could we do? So I want to share a few thoughts from that perspective. So here are my thoughts, I guess, of what one can do about motivating change to address these major concerns. Engaging community action, I'm going to focus on that this evening because that's kind of a collective community activity. Raise climate change discussion in groups, particularly when you're with friends that aren't like-minded, finding ways to bridge that discussion and bring it up, being sympathetic to their view, but trying to get them to understand yours is a terrific step as well. Obviously, I'm sure this group spends some time advocating with policy leaders to bring about the changes you want to see. So I think that's always a terrific step. And then taking personal action. There today are, very large number of steps one can personally take to reduce your climate impact. And so I'd encourage those as well. So let me just talk for a mere moment about community action. So in Princeton, we put together what was called the Princeton Climate Action Plan. This was a town government, so council unanimously approved and supported this plan. It's a collective plan that involves businesses, community groups, area nonprofits to really work on collective action. We always started out this plan by really looking at the problems, not just talking about the bigger global challenges, but really thinking about local. How was climate change impacting us? And as you can see, this is a graph of very local data. It's for Mercer County data, the county that Princeton's located in. That shows you that there's been a 4-degree increase in the area. Rainfall has also been a major issue in this region. As you can see, the precipitation numbers are really a slow and steady climb upward, particularly in the year 2018, we had the highest rainfall charted to date. I think I'm not sure if I'm getting a few nudges that my time is ending. I just have a couple more slides, so I'm going to keep going through if that's okay. So here's some real pictures of how Princeton was affected. I'm sure I understand a number from this group live in Philadelphia. I think it is true that we're all experiencing the same torrential downpours, those that I mentioned in my earlier slides. This is really just showing here locally how that is impacting the winds, the hurricanes. It's taking a toll on our trees as well. Okay, so in Princeton, as I mentioned, we came up with this climate action plan. It was first and foremost focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So really working towards this chart here, it does parallel the state of New Jersey's climate action plan. But our real thought is that, this isn't a problem that we can all pass the buck on. Change needs to begin at the community level. And so we wanted to do our part. We divided the plan among these various groups, so really focusing on the areas where emissions happen, as well as looking at some of the resiliency. How do we strengthen our community to endure the changes of climate? So speaking of that, looks like, whoops, there we go. A couple of the actions that we took are one, we strengthened the stormwater response team. So really worked with the emergency services to do a couple of steps. We embedded a new climate change hazard annex in the town's emergency operations procedures. So that was a real step. Everybody started thinking about climate change. It was really interesting to have conversations with the emergency staff that are on the front line dealing with climate change, as they were very much in support of this concept of thinking forward, being preventative rather than just reactive. We did a couple of things, as mentioned here, tabletops. That's really kind of walking the emergency staff through experiences so they'd be well prepared. And then we also created a registration system for community members that were more vulnerable, anyone on oxygen or with mobility limitations. We wanted to know who they were in case of a time of a major storm and they would need help. We also created a series of marketing messages to educate people. Another step that we took was to support the Princeton community in mapping their stormwater drains. So one thing, even in a community as well-versed as Princeton, we were really surprised to know that their stormwater systems, which you can imagine were put in the early 1900s, were not mapped to the GPS or modern computer systems. And so that was a real downfall for the engineering department to be able to manage flooding or issues that arose. And so by mapping the stormwater drains, that was a great step in the right direction to provide informed decision-making. And then finally, one last step that Princeton has made was the establishment of a stormwater and flooding committee. This committee is working very proactively to create ordinances to manage stormwater, knowing that the water is coming, and probably more so and more quickly. They're considering a stormwater utility, which we could do a whole nother presentation on that, but that's kind of a proactive way to build the infrastructure to manage stormwater. Stormwater flow mapping, and then they were also integrating it into the town's more master plan or overriding plan for change. So with that, I will wrap things up. Hopefully the next speaker is here, and I hope I haven't gone in on too long, but thank you all.
Thank you very much, Molly. Yes, and I see that Okezue Bell, who is our next speaker at this point, has arrived. And he is a remarkable young man. He is a youth climate ambassador. I believe that's your title, you can tell us, for the UNA USA, that's the United Nations Association of the United States. There he is. And welcome, Okezue. We know that you have, you're only, 17 years old, but you've done research at Harvard and MIT. You've actually invented a prosthetic device and many other things, but you're here to tell us about your work and that of the UNA USA on climate and water resources. So welcome, Okezue.
Yeah,
Please
thank
go
you
ahead.
so much. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Okezue Bell. I'm actually still 16, so I'm 16 years old. I'm from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, though right now I'm actually in California at Caltech, and that's where I'm calling in from. So outside of what was mentioned, I'm very actively engaged within sort of science and technology research. Part of my reason for being here at Caltech, very interested in neuroscience and its interplay with a lot of other fields, and also fundamental research in biology and computer science, and how it can be applied to solve very important and systemic issues. Beyond that, I'm also very passionate about STEM education, and I sort of quantify my impact through manifold STEM initiatives. So one of them being my research, the other being sort of the prosthetic device, and the Dutom, which is a microlending application for the unbanked. And then the third, which also ties into my work with climate, being workshops. So I've hosted workshops around the globe for over 75,000 students across 80 different countries, sort of trying to reach students who are of underrepresented or under-resourced backgrounds, providing them with resources like books, etc. And then also coordinating a variety of humanitarian aid and efforts within the same sphere of STEM education. And so overall, I provided around $3.5 million in service/benefit to underserved/underrepresented communities across all of these STEM efforts, and activated around 120,000 people. And a large portion of these workshops is actually being able to talk to youth and get them to understand and get actively engaged with the climate movement, and also understand how and why it's disproportionately affecting their communities. For example, when I talk to people in the global south or the Middle East, they're experiencing temperatures rising more than twice the global average. So for us in the States or in North America, we're oftentimes not feeling the effects of the issues that we're advocating against. And so it's really important that we're also educating the communities on what's happening and why it's happening to them and how it's affecting them as well. And so with that, one technology that I'm actually really interested in, and it ties into a lot of my work with the United Nations, like UNA USA, but also UNICEF, UNESCO, and more, is with cellular agriculture, and it's a really interesting technological development that uses cells to create new protein pipelines that will replace existing ones that are largely unsustainable. And so when we look at things like our current protein production systems, we find that they're really unsustainable. They're really resource intensive. So for example, 4.5 times the size of the land of the European Union would have been saved if we only produced meat to meet our nutritional requisites. So if we, for example, just didn't produce meat in excess, we would save over 442 million acres of land. And so this is an example of how unsustainable the current process is. And it's exacerbated by consistent overproduction of food and of meat and other substances. Then we can move to agricultural greenhouse gases. Food actually accounts for 25% of climate change. So it's 1/4 of the big problem of climate change that we're aiming to tackle. This is more greenhouse gas than all forms of transportation combined. So say we just took all of our aggregate food supply from across the country and made it sustainable or created a sustainable pipeline, we'd be slashing over 1/4 of our anthropogenic or human-generated greenhouse gas production. Then 1 gallon of milk actually requires 4.5 gallons of water. So it's a huge trade-off in terms of water scarcity and also water pollution in producing just a single gallon of milk. It's a 1 to 4.5 ratio, meaning that every time we're producing milk, we're wasting significantly more parts of water. And so milk is only a 3 to 4% efficient technology. And if we look at meat, it's also not very efficient. And so where else in the world would we accept this level of inefficiency? If our phones were only 4% efficient, we wouldn't be happy. If our cars were only 4% efficient, this would be unacceptable. If technology in a lab were only 4% efficient, there would be no discoveries or developments. And so it just goes to show you how antiquated of a system our current food production is when compared to other technological pipelines. And when we look at things like beef, milk, and of course the methane flatulence from animals as well, we find that this overbreeding and production leads to significant issues. In fact, in 1997, the chicken, which is a largely overproduced and overslaughtered animal for meat production, used to be just a small, actually aviatory bird. So the chicken used to be able to fly, but now we have broilers, which are these extremely large sort of animals that, they can't walk very well. They wobble when they walk because of how fat they are. And even beyond that, they have to be killed at a certain late age because they can't support their own weight. And it just goes to show you as well how this overproduction of our food systems is actually contributing to our evolutionary systems. Chickens have evolved from these very natural airborne birds to these large broilers that can't sustain themselves or even move properly. So it's a really sad sort of crisis and issue that we're facing overall, especially when it comes to our food production systems. And so one technology that's emerging is something called tissue engineering, which is essentially just taking this special type of cell called a myosatellite stem cell. And this is a stem cell that essentially we know is going to become a meat cell. And meat is just a conglomeration of all these cells sort of stacked in an arrangement that we call a sheet or a fiber. And when multiple of these fibers come together, we get meat. And so if you think about it, if we say didn't allow this process to happen in an animal and instead isolated it to a lab environment, we would actually be able to produce meat much more sustainably and also completely change our culinary landscapes. Thanks to advances in genetic technology, we could edit the way meat looks, tastes, and its texture. We could change so many things about meat as well as make it way more sustainable. So cellular agriculture right now is touting 96% less land usage, 99% less greenhouse gas, 98% less water, 90% more nutritional value, and 45% less energy usage. So think about if there were sort of reagents in meat or things or pathogens in meat, those could easily be eliminated. People with allergies, you could create meat specific to a certain allergen that could also be alleviated. There's also so many other alternatives or forms of meat that could be developed using this technology. It's essentially taking control of this natural process of muscular development that happens in animals, but instead of having to kill an animal, we can just take a small cell biopsy from it, translate that to the lab, and then grow the meat externally. So it's the same biological process, the same biological product, just done in a completely different way. And so this technology is not only exclusive to meat, it can be done with any other sort of protein product. Oh, and going back to the previous slide, I've worked with organizations like Tufts University, New Harvest, and Aleph Farms on this technology, sort of as an advisor on both the scientific and youth ends, and I'll get to that in a moment. But like I was mentioning, this technology is not only exclusive to meat, it can actually be applied to a variety of other protein products. So for example, with dairy, all you need is that, again, that cell biopsy, then you can integrate it with any microorganism. And once you gene edit that microorganism, say yeast, you can get it to start producing the proteins that account for a lot of these different types of products. So it could be anything from animal products like wool to collagen to cheese and dairy. Cheese and dairy, their main proteins are whey. So if you get, say, a yeast cell to start producing whey protein, you could actually get milk from it. Again, the same biological product, just done externally outside of the animal and instead through a synthetic process. And companies that I've been able to work on with this technology are Perfect Day, where I advise alongside Leonardo DiCaprio, the Urgent Company, which is actually their daughter company, and SickKids Hospital, where I was doing gene editing research for a pretty significant amount of time, which ties very closely into this idea of editing microorganisms to produce functional animal proteins. And there are a lot of amazing people that are sort of working on this. I've been mentored / talked to a lot of awesome unicorns like Josh Tetrick, who runs Just and also Good Meats, where they're operating mainly in Singapore, where they've been able to get their FDA approvals to actually launch their products in sort of restaurants. Just Egg is obviously a plant-based alternative, so that's also a very unique solution to the food crisis. Of course, as I mentioned, Leonardo DiCaprio, and then also Ira van Eulen, who is the daughter of the inventor, or the granddaughter of the inventor of clean meat, and the daughter of a very important figure in the clean meat and cellular agriculture sector. And she works on a company called Kind Earth Tech, as well as newprotein.org. And they index a lot of the technology and also companies that are working on this. But I think a big question, now that I've kind of gone over this technology, is sort of, why me? Why am I integrated in this field? Why was I at COP27 as a speaker? What makes me important sort of to this field? And a large portion of this is actually the integration of youth within these climate sectors. It's almost essential that people like me are integrated into sort of the development pipelines and also the business rollout, because there's so many demographics in need of technology like cellular agriculture. For example, in rural areas where their climates aren't necessarily optimal for growing, you could say place a bioreactor in that area so that they can easily get animal protein available to them in a sustainable way, and also in a way that's very reproducible and accessible. So this just goes to show you that there are far-reaching implications of creating technology that's climate responsive, because of the fact that when it's climate responsive, it also solves a whole host of issues that are accompanied sort of within that same industry. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that the climate movement is very intersectional, meaning that there are a lot of problems that interplay with these negative outcomes that we're seeing as a result of climate change. And so when you address the climate movement in a way that's responsive, effective, and also I'd say actualizable in a lot of communities, you end up solving a lot of problems that have been intertwined with that same area of the climate movement. So for example, with food technology, it could be things like proper access to food. It could be things like enabling growing in a variety of areas, eliminating antibiotic resistance in our current food pipelines in order to make them healthier and reduce the risk of things like E. coli outbreaks, which we've seen in restaurants across the world, particularly in the US. Even Chipotle had an incident with E. coli sort of contamination with their food. So it just goes to show you how powerful of a solution this is, and how important it is to have people of diverse perspectives and backgrounds sort of integrated on the movement and driving forward education. And that also brings me to my work with the workshops. The workshops that I host sort of around the globe are for people who are often disproportionately affected by the climate movement, but are often excluded from the rhetoric and discussion of the climate movement and ways in which we are able to move forward. And so by being present for this community and sort of hosting workshops with them, getting to talk to them and educate them, this is a really powerful step in sort of ensuring that climate is resolved properly. And then finally, my experience at COP27 was definitely amazing. I was there as a speaker. I got to speak with the Nigeria Pavilion and also the Youth and Children Pavilion. And so this was really great experience. COP27 is the UN sort of annual climate conference. The year I went, it was hosted in Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. I got to meet amazing climate activists and really get to work within sort of the space, come up with actionable goals. I think that's a big thing. Too often we have activism that is static. And so we really need people who are in the movement, sort of trying to create change, very actively understanding the urgency of the movement, not just speaking on international stages, but taking action, whether it be through workshops or in academia. And so that's what I used COP27 to do, to sort of work with the American Lung Association now, Together Van, all sorts of large scale organizations, getting to be an ambassador for them, but also a voice for the youth, and also doing corporate activism within that sphere as well. I've worked with companies like H&M, sort of speaking about how they can make their pipelines more sustainable, and also within a larger sphere, the United Nations and World Economic Forum, on bringing this sort of solutions to youth from a corporate perspective, and also how they can make their development in corporate pipelines more sustainable as well. So I'd be happy to take any questions sort of after the conference and beyond that as well. But I really hope you guys learned something sort of about my work and the importance of integrating youth into the climate movement from a corporate perspective, from an activism perspective, and just overall, I think it's a really powerful and important message to share. So yeah, thank you for having me, and bye.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Okezue Bell. That was really fascinating. What you've shown is that there are many aspects to the climate issue, and certainly methane and meat production and all of these things can make a tremendous difference in how you remediate the climate, because methane does come from beef cattle. And if we have substitutions for that, that's great. And your work is impressive all around. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we will have questions for all of the panelists afterwards. You can begin to put your questions on the chat for any of the speakers, but address the questions to me. I will filter the questions to make sure everyone gets a chance and we don't have any, frankly, we've had rare occasions, but there has been a time when there's been disrespectful or almost trolling remarks. We need to stay away from that. So we will filter the questions. Please send it to me on the chat and I will pass them on to each speaker that it's directed to. Okay, so our next speaker and our keynote speaker is Ingrid Timboe. So where is Ingrid? And
I'm here. Hopefully you can see me now.
Yeah, now we can see you.
Great.
Yeah, it was a little hard getting in touch, but I'm glad this worked. And Ingrid is another very impressive young person. She is the policy director for AGUA, which is the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. And she will tell you much more about that. I won't take up the time. We're running a little late, but you have an impressive background. You also work for the World Wildlife Federation, I believe.
Yep.
So welcome, Ingrid, and please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And first of all, hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening with you all. And I am so sorry for being late. I've had a
You're muted. You're
Yeah.
muted. You are muted.
No.
Can we please unmute Ingrid?
Okay, can you hear me?
Now I can, yes.
Okay, sorry. It said the host muted me and I can't undo that, unfortunately.
Right, right.
If that happens. Okay.
Sorry about that. I don't know how that happened.
Okay. So anyways, really great to be here. So what as Ed mentioned, my name is Ingrid Timbo. I'm the policy director at an organization. We're a global network of practitioners working at the intersection of water and climate change. And I'll put up our website at the end if you want to learn more about that. But the topic that I wanted to share, and it actually fits well with both Molly and Okezwe's presentations, is this idea around reframing the climate crisis. So many of you might remember over the last few years, there's been a real concerted effort, especially by like journalists and the media, et cetera, to change how we talk about climate change or global warming from climate change to the climate crisis. And this was done because, and for a very good reason, because we are not acting with the urgency that we need collectively to address this issue. But one of the things when we, you know, words matter. And so when we talk about the climate crisis,
I don't know what is going on with this, but
I don't know either.
we have several co-hosts. Please, just to the other co-hosts, please do not touch the mute button at any point, please.
I am not touching it. So.
No, not you. Not
Okay.
you. Whoever it is.
Okay, great. So
Please
this
go ahead.
idea that we want to talk about today is reframing this and talking about, and this is something that I don't know if you saw the op-ed in the Washington Post from American author and historian Rebecca Solnit, but she addressed this issue in an op-ed about a month ago. And one of the things that she said that to respond to the climate crisis, we need a large scale change in perspective, to reframe climate change as an opportunity, a chance to rethink who we are and what we desire collectively. And I think that's a really powerful. It's also actionable. It gives us the opportunity actually to act. And so what I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to share today are two stories of kind of maybe the traditional way that we have been thinking previously, and then an example of where we're kind of moving forward. So actually, I'm going to skip this because Molly helpfully did a great overview of why we think climate change is water change. So hopefully you're all convinced on that. But maybe just to say one thing, so back in 2007, the IPCC, in one of their assessment reports, said that water is the medium through which humans will experience most climate impacts. And we see that. Molly talked about the different storms, you know, cyclones, drought, floods, et cetera. And so that's kind of the impact side of things. But more recently, they also said that water-based adaptation is central to effective climate adaptation and resilience. And this is the opportunity side of things. So really reframing just from impacts, but how can water actually support and help us bring about a future that is adaptive, is resilient. So I'm going to start with the story of the Colorado River Basin. This is my home basin. I'm currently in Oregon, but I'm from Colorado. And so, and it's also been in the news a lot lately. I don't know if you've noticed. So here's a map. Here's where we are situated. So the Colorado River starts on the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains, flows down through Utah, Arizona, Nevada, almost through California, and then into Mexico and out through the Gulf of California. So it flows over 1,400 miles through these 7 states. It also covers 30 tribal nations. It provides drinking water to 40 million people and supports a $1.5 trillion economy. And related to what Okezwe was talking about, water from the Colorado irrigates over 85% of our nation's winter vegetable production. It's also a major supplier of alfalfa and other grasses for our protein production. The river also provides critical habitat for over a dozen endangered fish and wildlife species, and is really essential to maintaining, along with the Rio Grande ecosystem function in much of the Southwest. So this is a very, very, very important, it's really the lifeline of the Southwest. However, we know that now for the last 23 years, the basin has been experiencing what scientists are now calling a mega drought. And we now know that this has been the driest period in over 1,200 years. So since the year 800 AD. And this is due to a number of reasons. There is natural variability in terms of climate in this area. That's actually quite normal. However, things like climate change and also the outdated management have made this drought much, much worse. And so what do I mean by outdated management? So this basin is governed by a treaty, and this is called the Colorado River Compact, which was signed just over 100 years ago. And it allocated water between the upper and lower basins. So if we look back at the map, the upper basin states of Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico received half of the allocation, and the lower basin states of Nevada, Arizona, and California received the other half. These allocations were based on 30 years of hydrologic data dating from the late 1800s that indicated the annual Colorado River flow to be approximately 16.4 million acre feet. An acre foot is a very weird old measurement of water. It's basically water that would cover an acre of land to the depth of 1 foot. But this actually was a much higher estimation than what actually normally flows through the basin, because that 30-year period of data that they used was actually one of the wettest 30-year periods in the last 1,200 years. And so Colorado River flow fluctuates greatly from year to year. It can be as low as 4.4 million acre feet, but up to 22 million. So you can see there that with this allocation system, they over allocated the water already, even back in 1922, even before there were major cities or population centers or huge agricultural production areas. There was already a problem. And we now know from the latest drought, the 2 largest reservoirs that are behind Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam are now roughly 25% full. And this has massive implications, not just for water, but also for energy production, because both of these are hydropower dams as well that provide massive amounts of electricity to the Southwest. So the reason that I'm talking about the Colorado River Basin is because this, to me, exemplifies this mindset of scarcity. We don't have enough. But the reality is that this is a manufactured scarcity. We built our cities, our agricultural systems, our energy systems in this region, assuming that there was so much more water than is actually available. We had bad data. There was never that much water, and there never will be. And so climate change is really giving us this opportunity to rethink our cities, to rethink our agriculture, and rethink our energy. How can we build a better world? One that works with our ecological systems and the limits that they have, and not against them. And so for this next story, I want to move to Zambia. And into the lower Kafue River Basin. And so here's a map. This is Zambia. This is in Southern Africa. The Kafue River Basin is the yellow one. And basically, this is a very important river. So Zambia, unlike the Southwest of the United States of North America, is blessed with a lot of natural water resources. So it is a little bit different, but as you'll see, they're still facing a lot of the same challenges that we are in the Colorado. The river travels nearly 1,000 miles before meeting up with the Zambezi, which is one of the major transboundary rivers in Southern Africa. It's such an important river because over 50% of the population lives there. It provides not only drinking water, but hydroelectric power, irrigation, and habitat for critical fish and wildlife species. However, this part of the basin is experiencing more frequent and intense flooding, while at the same time drought. And this is, again, when we talk about climate change impacts, they're often not experienced just in isolation. It's not just climate change, it's climate change and. So climate change, dam operations, land use change, population change, they're continuing to work together and impact the flows of this very, very important river. And similarly to the Colorado Basin, farmers in this basin produce over 80% of Zambia's crops. However, the difference there is they're highly dependent on rains and highly vulnerable to climate change. So it's less irrigated agriculture like what we have in the Colorado Basin. However, the communities there have been working together for the last few years under this project called AWARE, which is Accelerated Water and Agriculture Resources Efficiency Program. They have partnered with international donors, large technical expert groups to co-create and develop local solutions to restore the river and reduce flooding impacts. And part of this process is using what are called nature-based solutions. So for those that might not be familiar with nature-based solutions, or NBS, these are actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively, simultaneously benefiting people and nature. And so some of the NBS that our friends in Zambia have been introducing are check dams, which slow down water as it moves through the system, groundwater recharge trenches, and planting native trees. And what's really important about these is they have flexibility. So as conditions are changing over time, they're much more flexible. So if you think back to like the Hoover Dam, which I showed a picture of earlier, the Hoover Dam is not very flexible. You can change its operations a little bit to higher, low, release more or less water, but that's a giant, giant gravity dam. It's very difficult to move, but the solutions that they're working with are much more flexible. So here's an image of one of the recharge zones, the aquifer recharge zones that they've been putting in. Here's some other folks who are building some of those trenches. And so utilizing these techniques, the local communities are really taking ownership of their own futures and are able to address kind of compounding issues, whether it be food security, water security, climate change, flooding, et cetera. And critically, they're also taking their knowledge and teaching it to neighboring communities. They developed this wonderful game that they've been playing with ministers about managing water resources, and also the international community. They speak at large conferences like COP27 and the UN Climate Water Conference that just took place last month in New York. So they're really getting out and spreading the word. So before I close, I feel bad, just talking about everything that's going wrong in the Colorado Basin, right? Because again, we want to be able to look forward with hope and bring good examples of where progress is actually being made. And there is hope in the basin, actually. So a few years ago, there was a project that was piloted called the Colorado River Delta Restoration. So you might have noticed earlier, I was just talking about the 7 basin states, but the Colorado River is a transboundary river. It also covers Mexico. And there is a treaty that was signed between the US and Mexico. Mexico also has rights to some of the water. However, for the last 30 years or so, water has not actually been reaching the delta because it's being utilized upstream entirely. So the delta has gone completely dry. And that includes about 3,000 square miles of ecologically productive wetlands that have completely disappeared. So some creative policymakers were able to modify the treaty to allow for a special release of additional water into Mexico to re-wet the delta. And so they did what's called a pulse flow. And so they allowed more water into the delta to kind of reinvigorate the lower basin, or sorry, just the delta in Mexico. This was a binational project. It was led by Pro Natura in Mexico and the Sonoran Institute in the US, with strong support from both governments and also the local communities. So the local communities were very much involved in the restoration plan. They spent a lot of time actually planting in advance. And so we are able to see actually all of the benefits from that. And it was a very effective program. Now, again, this is something that needs to be done multiple times. They need to keep doing this. And so whatever we can do to promote this work and keep it going forward, it's really critical that we do, because especially right now with everything that's going on in the Colorado, with the renegotiation with the Bureau of Reclamation and others about how they're going to do all of this drought planning, basically, it's really important that we remember that the river actually needs water as well, not just the communities that live in the basin, not just the agriculture. So I think just to close, I wanted to close with another quote from my hero, because really what inspires me to do this work is my nieces, my nephews, and future generations. And she writes so beautifully about this. And so I just want to leave everyone with this quote and say, thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ingrid, we have just a couple of questions so far on the chat. I want to remind people to direct them to me so we can pass them on to Ingrid and to Molly. Okay. So one question is, a lot of people, and this is to both of you, I think a lot of people are wondering if we can find better ways to use floodwaters and save them for times of drought. So you want to start, Ingrid? You're on screen. Please go ahead.
Oh, sure. I'm not still sharing my screen, right?
No,
okay,
you're on
good.
screen.
But that's a great question. So actually we can go back to California to look to a great example of something that they're working on right now. So as everyone has heard, there's been a lot of snowpack this year, which is great. They're at like 200% of mean annual snowpack right now in the Sierra Nevadas, which is really fantastic. Unfortunately, it's not going to completely deal with all of the drought conditions that they're experiencing in California. But one thing that they're piloting in a number of basins is what's called managed aquifer recharge, or MAR. And so what that does is they take, so if you imagine, you have the snow up in the mountains, and then a little bit further down is often a lot of agricultural lands. And so what they're doing is paying farmers to take some of that land out of agricultural production, allowing it to flood, and having the water then slowly seep back into the groundwater, into the water table below, where it can be stored for later use. And so it's also a nature-based solution as well, but again, utilizing things like aquifer recharge to store the floodwaters so that they don't just run off or flood or go directly into the ocean. So that's one example. I don't know if if Molly or
Okay.
Casey want to share
Yeah,
others.
I could chime in, Ed. and,
Molly, yeah, please go
Yeah, I
ahead.
just wanted to add on that I think on a very, let's call it suburban level, that same approach is really tried to be taken. So there definitely has been a time historically that stormwater has been shunned, you know, to the point where some people's gutters even are attached to the stormwater system, which is really what we don't want. So what communities are now realizing is the approach that should be taken is the exact same solution that Ingrid was just mentioning on a much larger scale. So the way that this is implemented, for example, is by creating you know, green buffers on the sides of streets to collect some of that stormwater and give it an opportunity to soak back down into the earth, so it recharges. So again, I think the approach is the exact same, just in a micro scale of let's no longer think of stormwater as the enemy to get rid of, but we really want to use all of our properties as a sponge to soak it down in.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question that came in, again, both of you, please comment if you can, is recently, and you may have been there, Ingrid, for part of this, the UN had a water conference, an oceans conference from March 22nd to March 24th, a global conference, and there were some agreements, some voluntary agreements, some progress was made, but there were also a lot of disagreements, particularly on the question of financing for the Global South to remediate its water resources. So let's start with Molly this time. Do you have any comments on that issue?
No, I think that one's too big for me. So no, I'm sorry, I don't have a good thought there. Maybe, hopefully
Okay.
Ingrid is the ringer on this one.
All right, so we'll go back to Ingrid. Please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So you're referring to the UN Water Conference that took place in New York last month. And yeah,
Right.
finance is perpetually kind of a big challenge, especially for water resources. It's kind of consistently underfunded in many places, both the global South and the global North, but certainly more so in the global South. Could have a whole other discussion about this. I would say one of the things that to me that we've really seen is that it's not that there isn't funding there. There's so much funding. There is so much money for these things. The challenge is matching the way that funding institutions, organizations, the way that they solicit projects, the way that they screen them, the way that they organize all of their kind of project pipelines are not necessarily the same way that cities think about or rural communities think about how they do water resources. And so there's a real mismatch between the funding institutions and the folks that actually need the funding. And so what we need to do a lot more work on is kind of bridging those two things. And there are groups and organizations that are doing that through kind of innovative financing packages like blended finance. So this is a combination of like public and private finance, or also, working with IFIs like the World Bank. These are going to be bigger projects, but more locally, there are groups. There's a group in the Netherlands we're working with called Water is Leverage that are trying to help build better projects that are more attuned to these types of financing. So it's a pretty complicated and nuanced space, but there are a lot of people that are doing good work on the finance, but it's a constant problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Ed, if I can chime in, I do want to give.
Please do.
Okay, I do want to give the hope that, again, I think that concept is embraced on a local scale. So I did touch on this concept of a stormwater utility. It is similar in nature to, everybody chips in your $7 a year to your sewage utility fee. So it's that similar concept. Everybody chip in a few dollars. But the other thing a stormwater utility does is that if a major development in a community is happening and it's happening on a property that can't manage the residual stormwater that's going to be coming from the impervious surface created by that new building, there may be other places in town where money can be put to build stormwater infrastructure. So I'm going to use the example of Princeton University. They have done an incredible job of putting stormwater infrastructure underneath many of their sports playing fields. So underneath their fields are huge gravel pits, and stormwater from other facilities can be shuttled into that, and then it gives the stormwater time to percolate down into the soil. So a stormwater utility is a financial vehicle that allows a community on a community scale to do what Princeton University does, which is remove the burden of stormwater. That financially, that person, that builder, developer pays for infrastructure to be built elsewhere. So just wanted to chime in with that, the little sprouts of hope that these smart ideas are being applied in other ways.
Okay, thank you both. Another question is from Theodora. She asks, how can the contamination of water by plants, I believe she means industrial plants, located near the waterways, how can it be avoided? For example, this recently happened in the Delaware River. Who wants to take that one? Why don't you start, Molly? You're right, right by the Delaware.
Yeah, goodness. I mean, contamination is a real huge struggle. I am not sure that I personally have great experience with toxicity. I have seen experiences, the Watershed Institute, which is an excellent water-focused nonprofit in our region. They, for example, manage their the runoff from their sewage systems, the water, the gray water that comes from that, through a natural planting area. So again, they've created a way that water, so not the same level of toxicity as some plants, an industrial plant, but I think there are natural smart approaches that can be taken, but you definitely need a team of scientists on board to make sure you're not contaminating the river. Ingrid, I'll hand that one over to you.
Yeah, maybe just to add, like, that this is also an area for regulatory, engagement as well. So whether it's, discharge permits and those sorts of things, or anyway, I mean, the regulators obviously need to be involved because it isn't legal to do a lot of this stuff. But unfortunately, it happens all the time. So
I think that's right on target. Let me just jump in myself on this, because we've been working on combating fracking in the Delaware River Basin. And so far we have succeeded. And what fracking does is exactly what the questioner was asking about. It's the same as an industrial plant, except it comes from pumping water out of a river and then back down, but full of toxic chemicals from extracting gas or extracting oil. So we have been able to get that banned in the Delaware River Basin through working with the Delaware River Network, Delaware River Keepers Network, it's called, and many other organizations. So that is exactly what a regulatory, agency should be doing. So that to that degree, the Delaware River Basin Commission has acted very, very responsibly. On the other hand, now there's a proposal to pump fracking wastewater into the Delaware Basin. Now we're combating that one. So that is one thing I would recommend to everyone to write your congressperson. Don't let this happen. Okay, so So let me see, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to Reverend Bob Moore for some next steps. Let me see if we have one more question here. Okay. So Daniel says, can you please ask Ingrid, but I'm going to ask both of you, about rain barrels and cisterns? I understand that cisterns have a problem with mosquitoes. Okay, so please go ahead.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, there are definitely always kind of unintended potential consequences, but those can be mitigated in a number of ways. Yeah, I mean, rain barrels are something that are really growing in popularity, especially out in the West. I used to live in Utah, and Salt Lake City has a great rain barrel program, which they actually really need. Although then, you know, it is keeping some water from getting infiltrating then into the ground, but the amount of water that's actually being stored in those, generally speaking, is not enough to really be fully altering the water table balance. So that is something that people sometimes bring up, but compared to our major users of water like agriculture and energy systems, it's literally a drop in the barrel comparatively. But yeah, when they, you know, anywhere where you have ponding water happening, it can breed things like mosquitoes. And so that can be a challenge, but there are different ways that you can mitigate those things depending on the region that you're in the specific.
Okay, thank you. Molly, any comment on?
I mean, I definitely agree that the water barrels can be a challenge. I think one thing that many communities are starting to embrace, you know, obviously the stormwater barrels holds the water there in the barrel, but are stormwater gardens. So really, again, kind of getting back to the point that was made earlier of the whole goal here is to keep the stormwater on your property and find a way for it to soak back down. And so stormwater gardens are a very wonderful natural way that many of us are trying to explore how to do just that. So hopefully that sounds good, Ed.
Well, thank you very much. Our time is unfortunately up for the question and answer period. We will have a copy of the chat, and maybe we can forward any additional. There's 3 additional questions. We will pass them on by email to our speakers and see if we can get some answers back. In the meantime, it is now 8:21. I want to turn it, first of all, I want to ask for a round of applause for our tremendous speakers. So thank you very much. And now I'll turn it over to Executive Director, Reverend Bob Moore of the Coalition for Peace Action. Bob, take it away, please.
Thanks, Ed. And I want to add my hearty thank you, heartfelt, to our speakers. I think they were all outstanding this evening, and it really deepened my knowledge and makes me hungry to learn more. So, you know, I think this kind of, this is, I think, our 8th or 9th annual Earth Day event. And it goes back to something that Ed helped start in 2015, which is that as a result of us sending delegations to participate in the People's Climate March in New York City that September. Some of you may have been there, 400,000 people, an estimated number came. And it was, we said, you know what? We need to be, you know, working intersectionally on this issue. Not just keeping in our own silo. You know, the climate crisis, some of us, including myself, are calling it the climate catastrophe now. It's not just a crisis, it's turned into a catastrophe already. And so we need to join together to address this other existential issue besides the nuclear weapons threat. So You know, we started the program, the campaign rather, in 2015. Ed was one of the leaders of that. And I think we've been doing Earth Day events, we've been doing other things as well in between. So the main thing I want to encourage you to think about doing is to be involved with this. And Jen has just helpfully posted in the chat box how you can sign up to be involved, which is to email Ed. His email is in the chat box right now. And, you know, one of the things it takes to sustain, I think all major change requires sustained commitment and sustained involvement. And so if you just want to find out what's happening, how you can help, whatever, you know, we want to have ongoing work throughout the year in partnership, not doing it ourselves. We're not the lead group on these issues. So our speakers are doing such outstanding work. They're the kinds of people that are leading this effort, but we need to be working in mutual support with each other to support these outstanding efforts and to make sure that this key information that's been shared tonight is shared more widely. So, you know, there's a lot of dimensions to this. Education is one of them that we're engaging in tonight to help ourselves become more educated about what is happening and what can be done to make the climate issue resolve in a more favorable way. We are on a very tight timeline. Things need to happen pretty fast now, relatively speaking. And so we do encourage you to be in touch with Ed, to step forward and volunteer to be a part of this ongoing effort. And we would love to have you. You know, there's no single thing that's going to be a magic bullet that's going to solve this, but certainly an aspect of the issue that was brought to light this evening and amplified on so well and so expertly is that water is essential to all of this. And it goes back to really water is an essential ingredient for life. Without water, there is no life. And so, you know, we need to address this water aspect. We've been learning now that a big part of the climate catastrophe is because water is evaporating too fast from excess heating. And when that happens, we get all the things that we see now. I remember when I was younger, there was no weather story on the national news. And now when I watch the national news, one of the lead stories night after night is the extreme weather that we're seeing. And so, you know, we've got to join together. We've got to work intersectionally. And that's really what our efforts with the No Wars, No Warming campaign are about. I'm so grateful for Ed's continuing leadership on this. We've had other people, young people in our midst who have been co-leading it with Ed. Several of our assistant directors previously, Alessia Vega, Nikki Van Aller, did a great job as co-leaders with Ed. And so we're grateful for that. I'm very impressed, by the way, with the youth of tonight's speakers. One of whom I didn't realize he was that young is only 16 years old. My goodness. He's almost like a child genius. I mean, that was just amazing, the things that he was ticking off. So we have some great minds, some great hearts, committed people coming together. We thank you for being with us tonight to learn.
Before we sign off, can I just chime in for just 1 second?
Sure.
There's someone in the audience that we should have recognized before, who's one of our co-sponsors, Christian
Good.
Morsink, of the Global Water Alliance at Penn. He is the president. Is that correct, Christian? Do you want to say a couple words about what you're doing?
You hear me? I was unmuted and all that stuff. I was listening in. Yeah, we are very much listening to the thing and hearing the enormous amount of issues that are playing out. And our conference that we are organizing on October 19th will specifically address some of these issues of building resiliency around the climate change. And we focus on water supply and on hygiene issues and sanitation. We do not go that much in the world of agriculture and biodiversity, river restorations, wetlands development, but they're all interconnected. So in this particular thing, when I'm listening to Molly and Ingrid, I'm thinking we have the same kind of audience where we could like to build our coalition going forward. Our focus is quite a bit on issues that are playing out in other parts of the world and not so much in America itself, although the same environmental justice issues are playing out as well. And as Ingrid said, what's happening in Mexico, for example, with the Colorado River. So the issues that we are picking up is very interesting material. And I hope that we can build on this particular talk that we heard today to bring up some new ideas and new ways of thinking. I like the idea what the young man Bell brought up around thinking about agriculture, because we can do agriculture totally differently. And that idea of rethinking agriculture, going away from the green revolution of the 50s and the 60s, and rethinking that is going to be an extremely important part. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion going forward, and I'm glad to see all the young people being able to getting this discussion to the point where I can sit back and say, okay, you take it over from here.
Well, yeah.
I've done my duty, and thank you for the new soldiers.
Hopefully we can do it all together in the fall as well. We brought together 6 organizations. Maybe we can have 8 or 10 by the fall.
Oh yeah.
So thanks again, everyone. And Bob, any final words?
Yes, again, to thank you for spending the time with us tonight. And we hope that you will stay involved. One immediate thing you can do, I think the information that was shared on tonight's webinar was really outstanding, is that somebody who's sort of in the back office, literally, helping us and making all these things happen is Jen New, our executive assistant at the Coalition for Peace Action regional office. We're very grateful for Jen's work, and she will be putting this webinar onto our YouTube channel. So check back, I'd say within a day or two, it'll be on our peacecoalition.org website. You just go to recent events, which is one of the tabs on the top, across the top. Just click on that and you'll see the recording there. And that would be a great way of spreading the great information and presentations that have happened tonight, is to share that with your contacts. And I know I had a little bit of sound trouble earlier during the webinar, so maybe some of you did too. So parts of it that maybe you couldn't hear as well as you wanted to, it's probably useful for us to watch it over as well again ourselves. So again, thank you for being with us, and everyone have a great rest of your evening. We hope to see you again soon.
Even I want to thank everybody. Sorry if you got distracted. I kept getting calls from Okezua who couldn't log in, and I was just a little bit flustered with it when I was doing introductions.
It's certainly understandable, Manisha.
Manisha did a tremendous job in bringing people here. And there are many people who wanted to come who did not. We actually had 80 people who originally signed up. So yeah, there were a few glitches, but we will have the recording. You know, please tell your friends who wanted to come. Check with us in a week and or sooner at peacecoalition.org, and or go to my email, which is on the chat, and we'll get it back to you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
And have a
everybody.
very
Bye-bye.
Bye.